Throughout the history of naval warfare in the 20th century, a few names stand out. One that echoes very loudly is the one of HMS Hood, Her Majesty's finest and the Royal Navy's greatest pride. This ship's history is really interesting, and therefore I have collected a lot of really interesting links leading to videos from Drachinifel and I explaining the history, going from the history of the ship itself, starting with its design, how it was influenced by the Battle of Jutland and its results, and further also how it led to the tragedy of Mers el Kelbir, and also how the ship found its fate on the 24th of May 1941 at the hands of the guns of Bismarck, which itself was sunk 3 days later. Look into the video description down below, it is really worth it, and without further ado, let's get into the ship review. Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder. So finally she's here, HMS Hood herself. What a beauty it is. This ship is so long that the camera actually has a few problems displaying it in the hangar of War Thunder. TLDR, it doesn't really fit in properly. But then there is the history of this ship, its real-life career, and then there is how this 3D model is filled with statistics. If you're here for the nitty-gritty details in the statistics, I get you covered. They're coming later together with some gameplay. Before I go into the gameplay, the statistical analysis, etc., a few things up front. The ship is not bad. And the ship then yet is kind of frustrating and disappointing. That has to do with a few aspects. First of all, there is the tendency of the ship to take on incredible amounts of water, and you really have to hurry to get the flooding under control and restore buoyancy. That is to such an extent that I think it's some sort of bug, and I think certain shells getting fired at you simply overperform. That is not the same problem that kind of harassed the SMS Spion in the few previous videos. That, according to Gaijin, has been fixed, and I actually didn't blow up in this ship, so much for historical accuracy. All jokes aside, the second thing is that I had to fight the rangefinder or the aiming system even more so than usual, and that then led to a little bit of frustration. But when the shells hit, either of two things happened. Either the shells really seemed to interact with the armor and did their job, and the results were stunning in terms of damage. We're talking about 8 15-inch guns, the largest caliber currently for any capital ship in the game, or it just simply didn't do anything, and why that is, we shall see. And without further ado, I think it's time to just get into the gameplay and the review itself. Let's see what is what. So let's start with the armor, and this is very much a child of the First World War with the distributed armor scheme from bow to basically stern. It starts with no essential armor, then the plates get thicker and thicker, as well as the bulkheads, and we're looking here at a lot of platings, deck platings as well, in various different thicknesses, too many to go through them one by one. Then we have the barbette with up to 12 inches, the turret front with 15 inches, and again 12 inches for the side of the turrets. That is a significant amount of armor that usually can only be found on battleships. And we have various different internal layers as well, together with a turtleback. And so that gives us a lot of protection from various different calibers, but in practice this doesn't work as well as in theory the all or nothing armor scheme, since the distributed armor scheme doesn't range to the entire length of the ship. After all, it's a battlecruiser, not a battleship, even though, you know, it's not like the Invincible class. There are a lot of internal things to be hit, but I again have to point out that I was never actually detonated by a magazine explosion. So that is absolutely a positive factor. And again, this is just a really big ship. Let's start the statistical analysis with comparing the guns, the main battery guns. HMS Hood has in its 1941 configuration 8 381mm guns. Those are the 15-inch/42 BL Mark I with 960 rounds of ammunition. They are currently the largest caliber, only kind of matched by the Bayern and the 14-inch guns of USS Arizona and IGN Huger come close in terms of caliber. 960 rounds is more than enough for any given battle. The reload with 30.2 seconds is fine, but SMS Bayern has faster reload, and especially Kronstadt and Scharnhorst have significantly faster reload, but they also have smaller guns in caliber. So the DPM is kind of okayish on the lower end, but for that you have the biggest guns in the game. So much for that. Let's talk about the shells that the 15-inch guns on HMS Hood have available, and we only have two shell types. The first one being the 15-inch for CRH CPC round, categorized on the very right hand side of the Excel spreadsheet under the category Special Shell, and that's quite the impressive shell on paper, having by far the highest penetration of any SAP round in this comparison at 10 kilometers with over 350, with nearly a 60 kilogram heavy warhead. And again, that's the stock round, but the muzzle velocity with 752 meters per second is relatively slow, so you have to lead more on the horizontal scale than with other shells. So this shell is quite impressive when it actually does the job. However, we have here a fuse delay of 0.035 seconds and also a fuse sensitivity of 12 millimeters. Now, with the sheer amount of light cruisers, premium cruisers, whatever, that I encountered, this shell very often didn't do the desired effect. It absolutely doesn't have a problem in terms of penetration power, but then the effect was kind of very often underwhelming, and I suspect that the plating in the way of many of the hits that I scored was not enough, and even if the fuse was activated, then the fuse delay being the same as with the AP round meant that when there is a broadside cruiser, it very often wasn't wide enough for the shell to actually go boom inside of the ship. And I suspect that there needs to be a sufficient amount of main belt in the way. Now that has the caveat that this requires more things to be arranged. The problem for this is that you only have 8 guns, the DPM is on the lower side, and the precision is not all that great from those guns. That means on paper it's great and awesome, but in practice very often you just do not do the damage, and you very often do not have also the time to finish off the target, and you get quite an awful amount of kill assists. The second shell type is a tier 1 modification, being the 15-inch for CRH Mark 12A APC round, categorized on the very left of the Excel spreadsheet under the APHE bracket. And again, a shell that is quite impressive. 644 millimeters at a kilometer, still 422 at 10 kilometers, and a bursting charge that is only outclassed by SMS Bayern. Again, low muzzle velocity, you need to aim quite an awful amount, and because you have a bursting charge that is roughly only a third of the SAP rounds, I don't have a problem penetrating targets with the SAP round, and so I don't really need to often switch to the AP round. It's nice to have, it's a good round on paper, I just don't have to fight the targets very often. So this is really not that necessary, and that brings us now to the secondaries. So the secondaries on HMS Hood are, to give you the TLDR version, not all that great. On paper, some stats are outstanding, such as that you have 14 102mm guns, but you only can bring at most 4 of the twin mounts, aka 8 guns, of the 4"/45 Mark 16 variety to bear. And then you have a 3-second reload and a DPM of 160 shells per minute. That sounds impressive, but you also have to take into account that all other battleships and battlecruiser secondaries are significantly larger in caliber, therefore better at range, delivering significantly more potent shells. And this is where also you have to take into account that the HMS Hood's secondaries double function as AA batteries, as the heavy AA, and if you use them versus surface targets, since we are not in World of Warships, you cannot shoot at aircraft, although even that is still futile since the time fuse doesn't really work. So for the secondaries we have 3 different shell types. The HE shell and the time fuse shell are essentially the same, just with a different fuse, having 1550 grams of TNT equivalent and 20mm of penetration. They are not really all that important, and the best shell is actually the SAP round with 102mm of penetration, but that falls off quite drastically, and the 600 grams of TNT equivalent bursting charge is not all that great. But you have a high DPM and you have also a high muzzle velocity, so it's better than nothing. But if you really want to combat an enemy light cruiser, you know, you have to look at the shells from SMS Bayern or even more so IJM Huger. Those are the shells that actually do work. And then obviously, yeah, the male Russian fantasy Kronstadt's 6-inch guns are also very potent. So let's have a look at the last Excel spreadsheet, and we can see first we have to look at the torpedoes. HMS Hood has overall 12 torpedoes, but only 2 per side in tubes ready at a time. So you have to work with reload, and also you have to fire them from fixed tubes, and that takes a while before they actually launch, so you really have to aim with the entirety of that ship, and we will come back to this in just a moment. Those are of the 533mm Mark IV category. Depending on the torpedo mod that you use, you exchange range for speed, but even that is not all that impressive, and the warheads have only 234 kilograms of TNT. I have never came across a situation in my 2 days of playing the ship where this would have been useful, and to be honest, it only serves as an additional easy to hit ammo rack, so you better ditch them. Now let's come to the hull. So as I said, this is a very long ship, very impressive indeed, and this is the heaviest ship with 48,360 tons. Top speed is an impressive 57 km, although Scharnhorst and Kronstadt are just a bit faster. However, it's quite impressive how quickly this ship loses speed in a turn. Even if you touch the rudder just a bit, you go down immediately quite a bit with speed. And this might be advantageous when you want to dodge torpedoes, but it takes an eternity to turn this ship. And further, you just get HE spam, your funnels get broken, your machinery is on fire, whatever, and then you lose also a lot of speed. It's rather rare that you can use the speed, but you know, it's better to have the option and not having to use it, rather than to having to use it and not have it at all. And especially the comparison to SMS Bayern shows how good the speed advantage in theory is. So the last thing that I want to mention is that you actually have relatively modern AA for battleship or battlecruiser next to the 14 4-inch secondaries, aka heavy AA. You also have 3 octuple 40mm 2-pounders and also some quadruple heavy machine guns, 4 of them, and especially the octuple 40mm can be quite impressive. However, you only have 3 of them, and the main deck that you currently can see very often just gets purged with HE shells, and I recommend to only repair those installations either when a main gun turret is broken or when actually an aircraft is in the air. However, versus a Heinkel 177 with Defense X, P8, etc., from high altitudes, that's not really effective. So this has been the statistical analysis of HMS Hood in comparison to its main combatants on the open oceans of War Thunder. So the numbers, what do they mean? Well, first of all, you have the firepower to deal with everything that there is. And you are best suited to duel enemy battleships, battlecruisers at range. You're not really a good brawler. Not just because, well, your torpedoes are not all that great and very situational, but also you don't have really the secondaries nor the turning circle to get out of harm's way. So, at the end of the day, you have big guns and you should use them. Take very precise aim, take the rather slow muzzle velocity into account, and then watch the results. And that is as simple as it sounds. There is sadly not anything more to it. Yes, if you get shot, try to angle, try to wiggle, try to dodge, but at the end of the day, you really have to bring in your shots. That's the primary thing. And that's HMS Hood at the moment. I hope that Gaijin will improve the aiming situation. I hope that Gaijin also addresses the problem with the flooding, so that the Mighty Hood is actually the Mighty Hood and not just some weird 3D model that randomly flips over by some HE shells. So that's it for me today with the review. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed it, and again I want to remind you to look into the video description down below. There are links to some really interesting videos regarding the history of this ship, and let me know in the comment section what you want to see more of this review. If you want to have further explanations on certain topics regarding naval forces. And at the end of the day, you know where to like, you know where to subscribe. Share this link with your friends, clanmates, and whoever you can annoy with this link. And as usual, we will see each other on the battlefields, in the skies, and on the waves of War Thunder.